Who dat? Welcome to the podcast you've been waiting for. Great perspective and exclusive interviews.
It's a hard job for those guys because it's happening fast.
The kind of Saints insight and fun commentary you won't get anywhere else.
We've got plenty of technology to speed things up.
It's time to kick off your Been There, Done That Saints podcast, where we hand it off to our host, Mike Nabors, and Super Bowl winning linebacker, Scott Shanle.
Proud of these guys.
That's a decision that you don't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to retire. It's definitely a process.
Drew Brees talking to NBC, his next team as he officially retires from the New Orleans Saints. Welcome to your Been There, Done That podcast. I'm Mike Nabors. I'm going to bring in my team producer, Justin Thomas, and my co-host, Scott Shanle. Shanle, you know what? A few things have happened since the last time we spoke. We wanted to kind of let the news clear before we evaluated things because things were happening fast and we didn't want this podcast to be dated. But the Saints are under the cap, $75 million under the cap now. I mean, that's how much they had to trim anyway. Drew Brees has retired. Let's first talk about Brees. I think we were wondering why this is taking so long, but it makes sense now that he retired on the anniversary of him signing with the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, I thought it was well done. I thought it was well thought out, especially because the longer this went on, I started to think Drew's competitive side and watching Tom Brady win a Super Bowl. I thought, oh no, Drew, are you going to come back? Are you going to try to do this thing again? But I think making it meaningful by retiring on the anniversary of when he came to New Orleans in 2006 just made it that much more special. It made it special for me as a former teammate. I know the fans probably appreciate it. And Drew works that way, where he wants things to mean something. He wants things to be done for a reason. And I just thought the memories of showing him signing what he looked like 15 years ago, didn't quite know where his career was going to go. And now to turn it around into Hall of Fame career and turning the New Orleans Saints organization and program around into being one of the best in pro sports. I thought it was well thought out and well done by him.
Justin, we knew Drew Brees was going to retire, but I don't think this is going to set in until the team begins next season. He's been such a staple and the best Saint in the history of the franchise. I think this is going to take a little while to set in, even though we knew it was coming.
Oh, absolutely. What, like 14 years he's been with the Saints?
15,
I think
15, yeah.
15, yeah. So I think it's going to take a while. I think probably, for me at least, the moment when it will be real is when either preseason or if they have him or regular season, when we see Taysom and or Jameis on that sideline and no Brees anymore. That, I think, is when it's going to really hit that, this dynasty or this legacy has ended and the future is now here.
We'll get Sean Payton's thoughts on his quarterbacks as he talked to Dan Patrick. That was a fun interview with Sean Payton, and we'll break that down. And a little more from Drew Brees in terms of his TV career and a little more on Brees. Let's stay with Brees, though. On free agency, we'll have that coming up too. But in terms of Drew Brees, Shanle, the thing that sticks out for me is, 15 years with the Saints. So if you're the age of 15 to 30, all you've known is success. And obviously you were a big part of that playing with the Saints. But before that, if you're the father of a 15 to 30-year-old or a grandfather, it's quite the difference. And I think that's what Sean Payton and Drew Brees and, players like you have meant. But you got to be proud of that. And Brees has to be proud of that, looking back at how the seismic shift of the New Orleans Saints, what he meant to that franchise leading the way in so many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And no matter what, how they honor Drew, whether it's retiring his number, never letting anybody wear number 9, the trophy or the statue they build of Drew will never be big enough to compared to what he meant to the city. I mean, I saw a stat the other day where before Drew Brees, the Saints were the 3rd losingest franchise in NFL history, and since then they've been the 4th winningest. It's unbelievable how one guy. And obviously there were guys along the way who helped him. It wasn't just Drew, but everybody knows you have to have the quarterback. And what he brought to that organization, not from just his ability to dissect a defense and having a 75% completion percentage, all the records he broke, it was more so about the person he was, the leader he was, how he made everybody in that building be the best version of themselves. He inspired me every day. He was the best player on our team, but I saw the way he worked. And when he works that way, you sit there and say, well, why can't I do one more rep in the weight room? Why can't I stay in the meeting room a little bit longer? He's here. He's the last guy in the building. So it's those type of intangibles that you don't see on Sunday that helped him be the player he was and also make everybody around him better.
I've heard Breeze say that, in the first preseason, I've heard you say this, that the shoulder wasn't right. He wasn't making all the throws, but halfway through the preseason, he felt like he'd be okay. And you came over halfway through the preseason, really towards the end of that preseason. Could you tell right away that he was the guy, or did it take a little while? But I mean, you guys won right away in '06 after the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, it took a little while, but I came from Dallas where we had quarterbacks galore. I went through Quincy Carter, who was kicked off the team. We had Vinny Testaverde, who was at the end of his career, Drew Bledsoe, and so when I went to New Orleans, it wasn't like Drew stuck out like a sore thumb, good or bad. It was just we were all trying to find our way. We were a whole new team assembled, but those qualities of him being able to throw the football, no, I never saw him breaking all the records and doing all the things he did because he was recovering from his shoulder surgery. There weren't that many impressive things he did with his arm throughout that first half of the season that made me say, wow. But from the very beginning, the type of person he was, the leader he was, all those other intangibles I just talked about, I saw those from day one. And I think that's the side of Drew that I wish you could see more on Sundays than what you see. Obviously, you see the phenomenal talent, but there were so many other things that led to him flipping that organization around. But early on, no, it was nothing impressive as far as throwing the football.
We'll get into his legacy and more likely later on. That's kind of a tease of our fun segment where we do hypotheticals. But Drew Brees is going on to NBC. He was going to call college football games. He told me that years ago that he wanted to bring his sons on the road and show them that atmosphere. But he's also going to break things down in terms of the NFL in studio as well. But, he also said on this podcast, as we talked to him at the Pro Bowl a year ago, that, he feels like he'll be good at this and he'll provide a different perspective. And we've talked about this, but let's kind of bring it back a little bit. I think he's going to be great at this, but I think what's going to make him great is seeing the Tony Romos of the world do well. He's going to think, you know what? I can be better than that, right, Shanle?
Yeah, I mean, it's the competitive side of him. He watched, for the number of years he played football in the NFL, he watched Tom Brady, he watched Peyton Manning. He compared himself to those guys and wanted to be better than them. That's what drove him to put in all the hours he put in. It is going to be no different. I've always said, no matter what line of work Drew went into post-playing career, that competitive drive, that motivation he has every single day to be a better version of himself will push him. It didn't matter if he went into coaching or now into media, but he is going to be outstanding. I think people will really love it. They'll get to see the other side of Drew, the personality. And I've always said, if people love Romo, wait till you see Drew Brees do this job.
And I asked him, he took exception to the question a little bit at the Pro Bowl about being critical of players. And he told me it's all in how you say it. That's how he's going to approach it. But here's what he told NBC when he announced in his first on-camera interview about his retirement after he posted it on social media. And here's what he said about how excited he is about TV coming up this season.
I'm excited about that journey. I'm excited to stay very closely connected with the game of football. It's been such an important part of my life. And I continue to be able to talk about it and show a passion for it and bring my kids along for the ride there as well and let them be part of some of those special moments.
People are critical in different ways, Shanle. Tony Dungy is laid back in his criticism. Chris Collinsworth is very outward. You have guys like Chris Sims, very outward. What do you think Brees will fall into all of that when he has to, kind of break down an interception or maybe trouble off the field or, he's going to have to comment on some of this stuff?
I think it'll be tough at first, and that's the toughest transition, going from playing and sitting in those meetings and having coaches attack you as a player, and now figuring out a way to critique a guy, but not criticizing. I think that's the most important thing. And the one thing I found by doing it and covering the Saints or LSU football is offer the critique of a player's play based on the same way they would hear it in a meeting room. Bring it out like a coach, because I think players don't get offended if you bring it out like a coach as opposed to being a fan or an analyst or quote unquote a regular media member. Guys get offended when you deliver it a certain way. So I think Drew will be good at it as far as showing you why it broke down inside the play and making it more coach-like.
We trained him at CST, so he should give us some props when he's at NBC. I'm just saying there, Drew, if you're listening, come on. We built the foundation for you. Well, in comes the quarterback battle. If you think it's a battle, Shanle and I like to disagree. I think Taysom, I've always still kind of believed in him, even though I think if Jameis, if they can pull the talent out of Jameis Winston and eliminate the mistakes. Obviously, he has more of an upside. But here's what Sean Payton had to say, talking to Dan Patrick about his two quarterbacks moving forward. He has said for a long time the future quarterback is in the building, and it appears that way. Here were his thoughts on the replacement of Drew Brees and Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston with Dan Patrick.
Our goal coming into the offseason was to obviously re-sign Jameis. Taysom played for us in 4 games last year, and let those guys go to work. And I'm excited about it. I'm excited about those two. Now there are a few things that may still be out there, but I see those two competing for this position.
A few things that still may be out there. What's he talking about?
Options as far as guys he likes, whether maybe it's drafting somebody high. I don't think this team needs a rookie in there. I believe this team is good enough to make the playoffs and still have a good enough roster, but maybe he sees a rookie, a future of the franchise. Maybe he sees a good veteran player that can come in and compete with Jameis if he doesn't fix the turnover issues, or compete with Taysom if they don't like the way he drops back consistently in the pocket and throws the ball from the pocket. So I think Coach Payton and this organization, you're in the business of collecting as many good football players as you can collect. So there's probably guys out there on the street that they may bring into camp just to compete.
When you talk about Jameis, and there was all kinds of speculation, can they keep him given the Saints salary cap situation? And Sean Payton is waxing poetic about Jameis right around the Super Bowl. And, we love this guy, and not keeping things close to the vest. It seems like the discussions took place before free agency. Shanle, listen, we want you. You're going to have to compete, but you're going to get a great chance. And I think Jameis, knowing he took the big pay cut to stay in New Orleans last year, or to come to New Orleans, knew that this was a great opportunity. And it really is. If he can turn things around, not only does he have a good football team around him, but he could go beat his old football team twice. And that's the defending Super Bowl champs. To me, there are so many layers to this story with Jameis Winston, Shanle.
Well, yeah, when you look at this contract Jameis signed, it was a good contract. He's a former number 1 overall pick. He hasn't played in almost 2 years. When you look at what Jameis are you going to get? So the fact that Jameis didn't even really go through the free agency process as a quarterback, it told me before we even got to free agency that Jameis knew he wanted to be a Saint. The Saints knew they wanted him. And the reason I like it is because it wasn't a 4 or 5 year deal. It's a 1 year. If you show us that you can throw for 5,000 yards and throw 10 interceptions, you are going to get a payday. We are going to commit to you. So I love it from both ends. I think Jameis has a great opportunity to show that he learned a lot under Coach Payton and Drew Brees for a year. Or if he doesn't, it gives the organization a chance to move on and not be hamstrung by the cap for a few years.
It's intriguing. I know the Falcons are the biggest rival for the Saints in the NFC South, but this Bucs rivalry is really crazy because if Brees would have retired a year ago, there's a good chance Tom Brady would have been with the Saints. And if Jameis Winston hadn't thrown the 30 for 30 against the Falcons, there's a good chance he would have stayed with the Bucs. It's crazy how things quickly turned in so many ways. But to me, Jameis Winston, Shanle, they talk about this. I live in Tampa. He never had a good kicker. And he never had a really good offensive line and never had a running game. And he has all of that with the Saints. If he can cut down on the mistakes, it's amazing how good the Saints could be. And then you have Taysom Hill potentially being the Swiss Army knife too. There's a lot of potential there, a lot.
Yeah, and I think the exciting thing is you're going to see a lot from both players. Taysom Hill is still going to play, and I think you'll see his role expand in the Taysom packages. But there's a part of me, there's a part of Saints fans that are excited to see Jameis throw the ball down the field. Deontay Harris, I'm excited to see him. I've called him our Tyreek Hill for the last year and a half because he can get behind secondary. I'm excited to see the deep ball reemerge into this offense. Now, there will be more turnovers. There will be more turnovers when you take more chances like that. But Jameis brings an explosive element to the offense that we just haven't seen the last couple of years. Whether that means you're winning more, I don't know, but it's all about turnovers. Nobody will dispute. Jameis has to take care of the football. Listen, Tom Brady is the GOAT. He's the greatest player of all time. There is a ton of talent in Tampa that Jameis just couldn't win with. And he will get an opportunity to play with a Saints team that's very talented, and the one thing that he cannot do, and I've said it, Coach Payton will not put up with turnovers. If he turns the ball over, you'll see a lot more Taysom than Jameis.
Absolutely. But I will say this, Tom Brady brought a lot with him, in terms of the support. I mean, the Antonio Browns of the world and the Rob Gronkowskis. I mean, he brought a lot of that with him. And Jameis didn't have that. The Bucs had talent, but I'll still say that offensive line's not that great. Gronk made him better, kind of sticking him on there at the end. But I don't know. I think Jameis, boy, if he can cut it down, there's so much potential there. Well, let's look at free agency. There's so much to get to in this podcast. So many guys are gone. I mean, you have Jared Cook gone, Emmanuel Sanders gone, Josh Hill, Quan Alexander. They tagged Marcus Williams. But to me, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree with me, Shanle, the biggest loss was Janoris Jenkins because, as you know, playing defense for the New Orleans Saints, the vulnerability on that defense for many years was the secondary, and those shutdown corners don't grow on trees. Did that stick out for you, or did something else stick out for you in terms of all the players that were let go and were salary cap casualties?
No, I think it's a culmination of everything. It's not one player for me. It's just the amount of really good, talented players that you had to let go to get back under the cap. And there's no secret. The Saints for the past 4 years, and especially last year, they were all in. They were in all in mode to win a Super Bowl because of the roster they had assembled, the guys they drafted. And you had to pay the price at some point. And you're starting over at quarterback. Trey Hendrickson, we knew was going to get paid. Yeah. He left. So there's tons of guys. Janoris, just his cap number. They like him as a player. There's tons of guys that they like as a player. Emmanuel Sanders, they liked him as a player. You get to a point where you have to start over. And so for me, it's really the depth of this team really took a hit. They're going to have to draft well. Guys are going to have to step up who've been waiting for their opportunity, but they're not as good as a football team as they were last year on paper. That doesn't mean you're not going to win more games, but it's just the culmination of kicking the can down the road got us to this point, and it's unfortunate, but I don't think it changes my viewpoint of where this team is and what they can compete for come the fall.
I just describe this team as fragile now because I still think they're a playoff team, but they're fragile. They don't have the depth. There's questions at quarterback. Is there a word that sticks out for you? Because if there's any major injury next season, it's hard to sustain that where in the past they could because they had the depth,
Yeah, for sure. The depth of this team took a major hit for sure because like we said last year, Trey a couple years ago was inactive. He was healthy scratches for games, and Davenport missed some time last year. Trey emerged. So there was always benefits to having great players backing up other great players. We saw it at quarterback. Drew went out the last couple of years. You saw Teddy come in and win games. You saw last year Taysom come in and win games. The defense really stepped up. And I've said for the last couple of years, the defense is the strength of this team. That's the side of the ball that has to take another step. You're working in a new quarterback. This defense needs to elevate their play even more. Obviously, that hurts losing Trey and Janoris and guys like that on that side of the ball. They're going to have to step up their game and help out this offense till they find their identity.
What do you do with the corner now? I'm hearing Richard Sherman. You hear all kinds of things. What are they going to do over there, you think?
Really, it comes down to the cap. What can you do in the salary cap? I mean, the fact that they didn't get into the Patrick Peterson sweepstakes, he signed a 1-year, $10 million deal. He's not the same player he was 5 years ago when he was listed as the best corner in the league, but that is not that much money for a guy of his caliber at this point in his career. The fact that they didn't get on that, probably because they couldn't, they're going to have to probably play a young player over there, roll some coverage, help that side of the ball, and Marshawn Lattimore is going to have to step up and be the franchise cornerback so that they don't have to worry about that side of the field. But I think it's going to be a young guy. I don't know about Richard Sherman. My only thing with Richard Sherman, he's a winner. He's won a lot. Yeah. He's been one of the best corners in the NFL. My thing is this. If anybody watched the Super Bowl a couple years ago, he struggles with speed. And that means the Saints won't be able to play a whole lot of man-to-man. And that really hurts Marshawn and this defense and their scheme. So I would be shocked if they signed Richard Sherman because he's more of a zone corner.
If they do sign Richard Sherman, though, I want to be at more training camp practices to have Jameis and Richard Sherman going to battle in 11-on-11s. That should be a little fun, right?
The mouths would never stop. Here's the sad thing about that, Mike. They don't even have a chance because Chauncey Gardner-Johnson will be talking over them the whole time. They'll never get a word
in. What about your man Marcus Williams? Boy, they put a premium on keeping him, and he would have gotten paid, I think, if he would have gone to free agency and the Saints knew it. Were you surprised the priority they put on him?
A little bit, and that's not. I think Marcus is a good player. He's played a lot of football for 4 years. Obviously, we know some of the struggles he's had with tackling and this and that. He's played a lot of football. I think the one thing that really benefited Marcus and him getting the franchise tag was the Saints have. We talked about depth, Mike. They've never built any depth at that position behind Marcus.
Yeah.
Marcus has started since day one. There was nobody waiting to take his job, and I think in the end that really helped him get that franchise tag, and it helped the team commit to him. He'll get one more year to prove it. If he goes out there and plays great and has a career year, he's going to he'll get a long-term extension with the Saints when they have more cap room when the salary cap goes up.
Absolutely. How good can he be? I mean, to me, do you feel like with Marcus, sometimes you really want to like him, and then he has one of those games? I mean, I don't. How do you see his potential moving forward?
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think Marcus, I think he's a great person. I think he's a heck of a teammate. And I'll never forget when they drafted that draft class, I was at a Pelicans and Cavaliers game, and I saw Mickey Loomis, ran into him. And the first guy he brought up from that draft class was Marcus Williams.
Really?
He's like, he said, this Marcus Williams kid, he's like a 20-year veteran already. He just gets it. And that was 3 months into being a pro. They loved him. They loved the way he went about business, the way he conducted himself. And so those things, I just talked about Drew and the intangibles he had. Those are things that you don't see that Marcus brings to the facility, brings to practice, that the Saints committed to. And that's just being a pro. And he has that side of it that the Saints love.
And before we get to more likely, I got to ask you about the linebackers. Quan Alexander would have been nice to bring back, but boy, they just couldn't afford him. And I don't really know where he is right now in terms of health either. But how do you evaluate these linebackers? Obviously, you have Demario Davis, and he's going to lead that core. But and you have Zach Bond. He didn't really play that much this past year. I mean, how do you evaluate that position right now?
As long as you have Demario Davis, you have hope. And as long as Demario Davis is still playing the way he's been playing the last couple of years, you have hope. Zach Bond is really going to have to step up. He was a guy I was going to bring up if you didn't bring up his name, Mike, because they drafted him high. You saw him sprinkled in a little bit last year. Obviously had to let Quan go due to the cap restraints. It's time for him to step up. Anytime you draft a guy that high and you play a little bit as a rookie, that's fine. You're still learning the game. They're still trying to figure out what you do well. The second year is where you need to see a big jump. So I anticipate Demario Davis is going to be the face of that defense again. But Zach Bond, it's time for him to step up and show this team what he can do well, whether it's coverage, whether it's rushing off the edge. It's time for him to step up because of the commitment that the franchise made to him a year ago.
We'll talk about the draft moving forward, but I'm looking at the first round, and you can do the best player available, blah, blah, blah. But how about wide receiver in the first round? If a good one pops up, could that be a need for this football team? Obviously, Emmanuel Sanders. I hate the fact that he and Thomas couldn't have played together more last season, but how about a wide receiver in the first round, or is there another position that stands out for you? Maybe cornerback, I guess, too.
Corner, yeah. For me, I would go with corner, probably the biggest priority. Somewhere in the secondary, even safety, because Marcus is on a franchise tag. You have Malcolm, who's aging. So I would go corner or safety if you have a player that high. Heck, linebacker, you could build some more depth. DeMario's getting older. There's plenty of ways you can go on defense. Defensive end, Cam's getting older. But offensively, I don't know how much I would do offensively unless you're building depth in the offensive line. You're set in the backfield. To me, you're really kind of set at wide receiver because of the quarterback situation. You're probably not going to be in 4 and 5 wides a whole lot for the majority of the season. So to me, it's defense. I said the strength of this team has to be the defense. I think you build that side of the ball so that you take pressure off the offensive guys.
Boy, it's going to be an interesting offseason for these New Orleans Saints. It already has been, but it's going to be lots and lots of storylines moving forward. Speaking of interesting, Justin, you know what time it is. We bring back Justin Thomas. It is more likely 3 hypothetical questions. And the first one, this is a tough one, I think, but maybe it's not tough. You look at the legacy of Drew Brees. In my mind, it was a crime that the NFL didn't have him in the top 10 quarterbacks of all time, because I think he's a shoo-in to be a top 5 quarterback of all time. More likely, this is kind of a two-parter. Is he a top 5 quarterback? And if so, where is he in the top 5? And, just kind of, I'm let you think about it for a little bit. Justin loves going first because he doesn't have as much time as Shanle. But if you do put him in the top 5, who's ahead of him? Who's ahead of Drew Brees? Is he a top 5 guy? And where is he in the top 5? Who do you put ahead of him?
This is difficult, at least for me, because while I'm familiar with older QBs, I never grew up in that era and got to watch them play. Never got to see how influential and instrumental they were to the era that they played in. I definitely think Drew Brees top 10. Top 5 would be hard because I think immediately the players better than him would be Tom Brady. I would kind of say, and I have to say Peyton Manning because he went to and won more Super Bowls. You got like Joe Montana, Steve Young. Like there's even Aaron Rodgers. Maybe you could make an argument. So I think it'd be hard for me just real quick to put him in the top 5. I definitely think he would be in top 10, probably in the 8 or 9 range. But it's also difficult for me as well because, like I said, I didn't get to watch a lot of these QBs that a lot of people seem to think are better than Drew Brees. I just wasn't a fan or wasn't able to watch during those eras.
Yeah, it's a fun debate. I love debating things like this. But Shanley, is he a top 5 guy, and who's ahead of him? Where do you place him?
For sure, I think he's right at top 5. I think saying he's 5th best is a safe place to go. I think when you start to say he's at the bottom of the top 10, that's too low. But 5 seems like that sweet spot because you have wiggle room to debate other guys versus him. Tom Brady, we all know, tons of championships. It's hard to really debate him not being number 1. But where I struggle with the quarterback debate, Mike, is the eras that guys played in.
Yeah.
Because these quarterbacks now, it's like 7-on-7. They don't get hit. Maybe Drew doesn't play as long. Maybe Tom Brady certainly is not playing right now if it was still old rules where Troy Aikman and Steve Young and Montana, these guys were getting whacked. That's why their careers ended. That's why a lot of the records are going to be set from here on going forward. So it's hard for me to judge the different eras of the quarterback play because these guys are treated way different now than they were before. But I think to me, Drew, I can make a legitimate case he's 4th, 5th, 6th, somewhere in there. To me, he's the most accurate quarterback ever to play the game. When you look at his completion percentage, what he was able to do year after year. Bill Walsh once said that 65% completion percentage was perfect. That's what he wanted out of his quarterback play. Drew Brees was 75% and made it look routine.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say that the most accurate quarterback isn't higher than 5, but it's just the accomplishments. That's where you start to change the argument. But again, it's a team sport. You want a quarterback to be accurate. He gave you that and plus some every single weekend.
Yeah, good points there. I'm a little biased, but because we're close to Drew Brees, we've covered all his games. I mean, heck, you played with him for so many years. Here's the thing about Drew Brees. And I'll say this to everybody that asks me, how was it covering him? And I don't know how you feel about this, Shanley, but the thing about Brees was not only the accuracy, because that's what stands out first and foremost, but when it was 3rd down, I don't care if it was 3rd and 10 or 3rd and 18 or hell, 3rd and 25, I felt like you guys had a shot. And you can't say that about a lot of quarterbacks, even maybe the elite of the elite. You always felt like Brees was going to give you a shot on 3rd down. And with that said, I go Brady 1, I go Montana 2, I go Elway 3, I put Brees 4. And people will say, what about Peyton Manning? I'm sorry. I'll take Brees in the clutch over Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning was a great quarterback. He won 2. He didn't win the other one, though. The defense won the other one.
That's true.
Drew Brees, to me, deserved a shot to get at least one more, and it wasn't his fault. I just feel like with all the records, with everything he did for a franchise that wasn't good before him, and here's another argument against Peyton Manning, Shanley. He didn't have an all-pro running back, future Hall of Famer, maybe Edgar James, the future Hall of Famer. He didn't have Marvin Harrison. He didn't have Reggie Wayne. He had some good players, but they weren't elite players. He made everybody around him. So I put him at 4, and I like him better than Peyton Manning. I really do. I think he's a cinch to be a top 5. Here's another guy, too, though, is Dan Marino. I think doesn't get enough love. I would put Dan Marino over Peyton Manning as well because, and I guess my point to bring it back to Brees is you have all the records and everything, and I know they're inflated, but the thing that I love is only – I guess 11 or 12 guys have thrown for 5,000 yards in NFL history, and they've only done it once. And the fact that Brees has done it 5 times, it goes back to your completion percentage thing. I mean, the numbers are big these days, but Brees amplified the numbers, Shanley, in so many ways.
Yeah, for sure. And you look at the way he played in this offense, and I should say this about my previous point. It's not Drew's fault. It's not Tom Brady's fault that the league changed the rules along the way, along their career, because I hated it when they did it. I want to see defensive players hit the quarterback. I want it to see the way I watched football growing up. But I also appreciate the fact that I got to watch Drew Brees for 20 years. I also appreciate that Tom Brady still gets to play the game of football. It's good for fans that these guys get to stick around as long as they have. That being said, the argument we're having, Mike, it's hard because who knows what Joe Montana would have done if he could have played 20 years?
Yep.
Who knows what these guys could have done?
How about Marino?
Yeah. Could you imagine Marino in this 7-on-7 offense where the ball is thrown every single down? I mean, these guys would have changed record books as well, and probably changed some of their winning percentages because the game is completely different now.
And here's the thing about Marino too, is he's a guy who didn't have any help. I mean, he never had a running game, and he didn't have a lot. I mean, he had the Duper and Clayton and those guys. They weren't Hall of Famers, though. To me, that says a lot. And even Tom Brady, he had Randy Moss, but they never won a Super Bowl together. So I like quarterbacks who elevated the guys over so many years, over decades, and the great ones definitely did that. Well, speaking of Brees and speaking of records, all right, I'm going to give you 3 records. He has the all-time passing yardage record, the ones that stand out for me. You can go off the board here. All-time completions and the consecutive games with the touchdown pass. Which of all of Drew Brees' records which one is going to stand the longest, more likely, in your eyes, Justin?
All right, so all-time passing, you said the most completions,
Yes.
right? Not completion percentage.
Well, you can pick whatever one you want. He has most passing
No, I know.
yards.
I'm just
he has passing attempts, completions, completion percentage, and consecutive games with the touchdown pass.
I think that consecutive game with the touchdown pass is amazing. To me, though, I almost think his completion percentage is outstanding. I know today we've already discussed it, but it's easier for QBs to throw the ball. But Drew has been so accurate. Not only has he been extremely accurate, he seemed to get better as he got older. And I know there's a lot of people out there who maybe say, oh, well, towards the end, he was just dinking and dunking down the field, easy, passes for completions. But to me, the fact that he maintained that and seemed to get better and better, that's astounding. I'm sure, as like Scott said, as the rules have relaxed, we'll see some of these. I mean, Brady will probably take away the all-time most yards passed, and he may take a lot of other records from Drew maybe when it's all said and done. But that completion percentage, I don't know if there's anyone else in the league who's even close to eclipsing that over a whole career. So,
and you know what, Tom Brady, you're great, but Brees did it in fewer years. Just saying. Shanle, the floor is yours.
True.
Yeah.
Here's some of the records, Mike. Just think about this, Justin. Drew Brees ended his career holding 4 major NFL all-time records: passes completed, passing yards, passes completed per game, and total offensive yards. 78,119 total offensive yards.
Insane.
To me, and there's some other ones. I mean, most 300-yard passing games at 123 games. Most games with 400 yards passing, 16 games. Most games with 3+ passing touchdowns, 97. Most consecutive seasons with 20+ passing touchdowns at 17. That stat, could you imagine telling a guy you're going to come to the NFL and for 17 years you're going to throw more than 20+ passing touchdowns per year? Yeah. I mean, that is phenomenal. So with some of those stats, I'm going to go total offensive yards. Over 78,000 yards, total offensive yards. That is moving the ball up and down the field every single week during your entire career. That is an unbelievable number to me.
I like that. I do think the offenses are going to continue to progress, and the defenses are going to have more and more taken away from them. So I think the quarterbacks will have more and more of an advantage. But given all of that, Shanle and Justin, I still love the consecutive games with the touchdown pass because it's more than the way football is played to break a record like that. You got to stay healthy. You got to be lucky a little bit. I mean, Brady was on his heels. I mean, United's had 47. Drew extended it to 54. And Brady had, I think, close to 50 or over 50. Then he had a game with that touchdown pass. That's like the Joe DiMaggio record in baseball, 56 straight games with the hit. You got to have luck with that sometimes too, and you got to be great. I mean, that record was around since 1960. And I don't care how the game is. That's incredible. 54 straight games with the touchdown pass. That's the one for me that kind of supersedes all these numbers with offense because – the game will continue to favor the offense because that sells tickets and all that stuff, but you still got to be lucky and damn good to get 54 straight games with a touchdown pass. All right, we mentioned that Sean Payton interview with Dan Patrick, I would definitely endorse that if you're a Saints fan. I think Patrick's the best. He's a really good interviewer. But he was asking Peyton all kinds of stuff. And it was funny, when they introduced the segment, they all went around the room, he and his producers, and Peyton was on the phone. And they said, guys, Sean Payton grew up in the 1980s. What music do you think he listened to? What do you think was his go-to? And they guessed Van Halen, REO Speedwagon, Aerosmith. Our boy Peyton went off the board. He went Cheap Trick and Rush. How about Sean Payton driving up in his Chevy back in the day in Chicago, northern Chicago? He liked Cheap Trick and Rush. All right. What was your go-to in high school? Did you have a group that was your go-to you listened to, whatever, with your buddies, your girlfriend, driving to school? Did you have a band? You could have a couple, but what were your go-tos? And I love the fact that we're different generations somewhat, so it'll be different answers here. But does anything stick out for you, Justin? I know you're going first. You don't have much time to think about this.
No, actually, this is easy for me.
Oh, really?
I grew up I grew up in the 80s too, but in the 90s, I started, I was old enough to where I would listen to music, be aware of what was on the radio, what was popular, what other people listened to. And my favorite band in the 90s, and still probably to this day, it's definitely top 3, was Smashing Pumpkins. That I love that band.
Wow.
I was a grunge kid in the 90s. I was all into alternative music and grunge. So that was my favorite, and still to this day I love it. I listen to them all the time. I guess that would be my go-to.
Nice. We gave Shanle a little time to let it soak in. Shanle, was this a tough question for you, or is it easy answers for you?
No, it's pretty easy. I went back and forth. I had some grunge, I had some Nirvana, Metallica, AC/DC, but my go-to band, it got heavier as game time came up, and I usually got to Pantera was my game day.
Nice.
Was my game day go-to.
That's actually a good band to listen to.
What made it great was when I played with the Saints, I actually became friends with Philip Anselmo, the lead singer for Pantera.
Really?
He grew up in Metairie. He still lives down in New Orleans, and it was so awesome getting to meet him and just letting him know how much his music and what those guys did as a band meant to me as a kid growing up, and listening to it in the weight room, listening to it before games and after games. So I would say if there was one band that I was always hooked to and still listen to, would be Pantera.
We should have him play a new intro to the Dundat podcast. That'd be entertaining stuff there.
If we had Phil on the Dundat podcast, we'd be severely entertained. It'd be the most hits that we've ever gotten. I can guarantee you that.
Is he still in Metairie?
He's not in Metairie. He's across the lake now.
Oh, he's across the lake now? We got to track him down, man. That's good stuff. I love Van Halen, man. And I didn't care if it was David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar, even though I'm more partial to David Lee Roth. I still like them both. Eddie Van Halen is just exceptional. Huge Van Halen guy. I always regret never seeing him in concert. And Tom Petty, I love Tom Petty. I saw Tom Petty a few times. I saw David Lee Roth in concert on his solo tour when I was in college, and my ears were ringing for like 2 weeks, man. That guy, he put on a show. So I'm a big Van Halen, Tom Petty. Well, we covered the gamut, man. We touched them all. Drew Brees has retired. We'll see about Jameis Winston. We'll see about Taysom Hill potentially in the quarterback battle. They're under the cap, finally. They're right around the cap. The draft's coming up. It's not going to be boring with the New Orleans Saints, but we'll have it covered on your Dundat podcast. Where are we on Twitter, Justin?
At Dundat Podcast.
That's right. We're on all the platforms, so please subscribe. We're on iTunes. We're on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, Google. Everywhere there's a podcast, you can find us. So please subscribe. Give us some feedback. Follow us on Twitter. All of that are much appreciated, Saints fans. Well, buckle up. It's going to be a fun ride. We're going to miss Drew Brees. We appreciate Drew Brees for being great, entertaining us for 15 years. Boy, who would have predicted that back in 2006? Not even Scott Shanle, but the future Hall of Famer. Enjoy NBC. We'll enjoy watching you as well. For Scott Shanle, Justin Thomas, I'm merely Mike Nabors. We'll talk to you soon.